Recently, I shared a sneak peek of these results from our big 5e weapon system survey, specifically revealing the least favorite weapon in the game according to over 7,500 D&D players, the blowgun. And I talked about some new features I wrote to make it more fun and actually useful. But someone asked, where can I see the complete favorite weapon rank? And I realized, yeah, together with now about 9,000 people, we've created a pretty definitive ranking of every weapon in D&D 5e. So before we get to more videos with new features for specific weapons, I thought it would be best to share this comprehensive tier list, which is ultimately informing this weapon system project. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing D&D together, and if you're interested in more details and updates about the project itself, stick around till the end of the video. Or, if you want to know my secret to rolling more critical hits with any 5e weapon, check out our sponsor, Only Crits. These frankly gorgeous dice that only roll natural 20s. Oh wait, no, they are in fact balanced dice of resin, stone, and metal, plus they make awesome dice cases and trays like my favorite, which is a case and a tray. And you get a free adventure with every order, so go save 15% with code BOB after this video. Now, this whole favorite weapon ranking is based on this single survey question. Given the opportunity, which weapon types would you keep in 5e with no changes, keep in 5e with changes or added features, or remove from 5e? And this tier list relies on that first response of what weapons people actually like as they currently exist in D&D 5e, then sorts them by the percent of all responses from least liked or least favorite to most liked or the most favorite weapon in D&D. So our least favorite weapon, the blowgun, was only liked or voted to keep as is by 15% of those 9,000-ish people, while 75% said to change the blowgun and about 10% said to remove it from the game. For some context, the most favorite weapon, which I'll reveal at the end, was still only liked by 59% of people, with 41% saying to change it, and amazingly, 0% saying to remove it, which is pretty impressive that out of around 9,000 freaking people, only a negligible amount suggested removing that weapon. Alright, from the bottom, we have the blowgun. Check out this video for all the reasons why the blowgun is definitely an F-tier weapon, and some pretty clever ideas for making it less terrible. Seriously, the blowgun is so bad that when I asked people in that video what weapon people thought would be the worst, many folks said they forgot the blowgun even existed and instead guessed this second worst weapon, the whip. It is really cool, but it's a martial reach weapon with way lower damage than every other martial reach weapon, and since proficiency and damage are the top two factors people consider when choosing a weapon according to that survey, naturally, people do not often choose the whip. F tier. And whip features will be the topic of the next weapon house rule video, but let me know in the comments how you feel about a tripping feature, whether or not to raise the damage, and how else we can make the whip more fun in-game. I'm thinking about introducing a chain as a simple whip-like weapon, because in like every movie with thugs beating each other up, somebody always has just a length of chain, but a chain might fit better as a variant of this next worst weapon, the flail. Similar problems to the whip, it's martial and has lower damage than other martial weapons with the same damage type, like the maul and the warhammer, but also like the whip, its construction implies that it should have some cool feature, perhaps for tripping, but more likely for swinging around shields. Maybe this next one needs something similar. The sickle. It's an extremely curved blade that is a tool, not a weapon. So it's considered a simple weapon, but mechanically, it is a dagger that you can't throw. F tier. Personally, this is one weapon I would happily remove and replace with a cooler, hooked short sword. Next, the trident. It's identical to the spear, except it's martial, and it definitely needs some kind of weapon catching or parrying feature to capitalize on those extra points, and make it worthwhile to keep in the game. Until then, also F tier, just like the dart. This weapon is a dagger that you can only throw, and no, darts don't have anything to do with blowguns in D&D 5e, Blowguns use needles. These darts are more like tiny javelins for adventurers who eat at Weenie Hut Juniors. This weapon had the most responses suggesting to remove it from the game, and I'm pretty on board with that idea. The only reason I have to keep it around is to reskin it as throwing stars, and give it one or two of the cool features I gave to Blowguns, because that would make it way cooler. Now we enter the D tier with 2 weapons you may have also forgotten about. First, the War Pick, another martial weapon with lower damage than other martial weapons of the same type. Maybe it could be redeemed by capitalizing on its utility as a pick, and it's basically identical to the next one, the Morningstar. Exact same problems as the War Pick because it's exactly the same weapon, mechanically speaking, but honestly, the Morningstar has even fewer reasons I can think of to keep it in the game. Unlike the Sling, for which I am overflowing with reasons it should be better. It should be a light weapon. It should have the concealable property that I wrote about for the Blowgun. It should have probably slightly higher damage or at least have longer range, and it should probably have the finesse property, and there should be both a wrist rocket style slingshot and a staff sling variant with their own cool features. Lots of potential for the Sling, but for now, D tier, right alongside the Net. Do I have to say it? It can only be used with disadvantage. It's really easy to escape. It only works on creatures that are size large or smaller. Kinda surprising that it made it this far on the list, but this next one really surprised me. The Dagger. Guys, the Dagger is perfect. I think it only ended up here because even though it does everything a dagger should do, the majority of folks still want additional features for it, like maybe some kind of bonus in close quarters combat. But I really didn't see any other common suggestions for the Dagger in the written parts of that survey, so let me know your ideas for dagger features down in the comments. And our last 2 D tier weapons are the Pike and the Halberd. Much like the War Pick and Morningstar, the Trident and the Spear, these 2 are almost the same weapon from a mechanical standpoint. But with the Pike just being a longer spear and a weaker lance, I really don't think there's a need for it in the game. And its piercing damage type should just be added onto the Halberd, which typically also has a spear point on the end, as well as some kind of hook on the back, which could be used to trip enemies, making it the far more exciting weapon choice between these 2 martial 1d10 reach weapons. Alright, with 35% of folks choosing to keep this weapon as is, we have our first C tier weapon, the Scimitar. It is mechanically identical to the short sword, and it is visually almost identical to a handful of other swords like cutlasses and falchions and sabers, which for some reason were pretty highly requested in the survey, but I have no idea how I could make each one of these meaningfully mechanically unique. Even for the Scimitar, my big idea is to add a variant that's more distinctly a hooked sword for tripping targets, but this could just be a variant of the short sword, so I don't know if the Scimitar is really going to make the cut. Pun intended. Next, the Light Hammer. It's a club, but you can also throw it, so I don't understand this being ranked lower than the club. It's like if we all chose the sickle over the dagger. But the people have spoken. C tier. And speaking of clubs, the Great Club, apparently not so great.
That's more like a great club. Yeah.
Okay club at best.
This simple 1d8 weapon should not be strictly two-handed. It should totally be versatile, 1d8 or 1d10, because it should remain a weaker version of the Maul. It does 2d6 damage. People love damage, yet we're still in the bottom half of this list. My only guess is that similar to the dagger, people want the Maul to do a little more. Historically, I believe this was essentially the same thing as a Warhammer, and it would have had a spiked point on the back, which not even the 5e Warhammer has, but my point is there could be a little more to the Maul. However, with its damage already being so high, from a designer perspective, I'm hesitant to add anything to it, and instead, I'd rather add features to the Warhammer, which is a little higher up on our list. Next, the Glaive. I've always thought this weapon was cool, but it is literally, in every way, even weight and gold value, 100% identical to the Halberd. C tier. The Lance. It's got good damage, it's got its own unique features. I could see an impaling mechanic coming into play with this. Check out my video about that in case you haven't. But not much else because it is already cool. Now let's jump through the next few boring ones. The Mace. It's a club with a little more damage. I'm surprised it made it this far. The Spear. This should definitely be a light and or finesse weapon. It should also have an option to launch it with leverage like an atlatl or even some kind of mechanized harpoon. And the Warhammer. We already talked about this one with them all. And now, with 47% of folks choosing to keep this next weapon as is, we have our first B tier weapon, the Heavy Crossbow. It's already really good, so I don't want to add much. But I do want to come up with a bunch of cool types of ammunition that could be employed with any crossbow or bow, and since this is the biggest and baddest crossbow, maybe it should be able to handle some cooler ammunition, like firing a grappling hook or something. That would be awesome. A lot of people asked for a repeating crossbow, but that feels like it could get kinda out of hand, so I'm thinking more like a double grooved crossbow, so you can just load 2 bolts at once. That feels less game breaking, but we'll see.
Come get a taste.
Ah, the Humble Club. It is surprising to me to see this weak weapon so highly ranked, and like I said, ranked higher than the Light Hammer, which is a club you can also throw. So I feel like most people looked at this like I see the dagger. It's already doing all the things it should do. B tier. Well, there were some solid suggestions in the written survey responses for a sap, basically a concealable club, and a tonfa, which is more like a baton that I see as having defensive properties. So I do think there's room for us to expand on the club. Unlike with these next two, the Battle Axe and Great Axe. It was great to see these right next to each other on the list because as a pair, these two martial axes are very different, and that's great. However, they are almost mechanically the same things as the longsword and the greatsword. I think they get away with this thanks to the third factor people consider when choosing their weapons, the aesthetic. In fact, I think this is the failure behind the Mace and the Morningstar, the Great Club, the Warpick and Warhammer, and the Maul. There might just be a little too much gradation among these style of weapons. Just a theory. The Quarterstaff. Just like the club, it does what it needs to do, B tier, and I don't plan on messing with it very much. Similar to the Javelin, which people seem to really like as is, even though it's a weaker version of the Spear and Trident. Honestly, if we give the Spear the range it deserves, I think it could just absorb the Javelin as a variant. Maybe a lot of martial-focused players voted the Javelin highly because they're familiar with it, as it comes with a few classes' equipment. That would definitely explain this next one, which was pretty surprising to find it way up here in the A tier. The Hand Axe. Its features and damage are a strong mix of the dagger and the spear that seems to really hit a sweet spot for a melee-based thrown weapon. Well done, 5e designers. And really, that's the theme of these top-tier weapons. The Greatsword. It is great. A tier. I'm a little surprised more people weren't asking for this to have a variant that counts as a reach weapon because super massive swords are a really cool anime trope, and I am considering it, but the base greatsword lets you roll 2d6, and that's enough for most folks. The Rapier. Good damage and a perfect example of how the finesse and light properties can be implemented to make similar weapons unique from each other. A tier. The light crossbow, hand crossbow, and short bow, back to back to back. These can also have cool ammunition. Maybe the light crossbow can have a feature like that double grooved variant I'm thinking about for the heavy crossbow. Maybe the hand crossbow can have a variant that's collapsible to make it concealable on your person. Maybe the short bow can have a composite variant to increase its range. But they're already great, so I don't want to change much. The short sword. I think my only change here might be to make it a simple weapon. That would also create a better opportunity to add some cool variants to the scimitar, which would remain a martial weapon. And here we are at the S tier. If you've been enjoying this video, remember to hit the like button so more people will see it, and if you've been keeping track, you probably already know what these last two weapons are. Or, if you haven't been keeping track, you can probably guess. Any core martial character can use these weapons. They have perfectly good damage, and they are iconic weapons that will fit the desired aesthetic for the vast majority of weapon-wielding D&D characters. Nearly tied at 58.6 and 58.8% liked, they are two of the only 3 weapons that rounded out to 0% of people suggesting to remove them from the game. The other one was the dagger. The top 2 favorite weapons of D&D 5e, according to about 9,000 people: the longbow and longsword. I do have this wild idea to add a finesse variant great bow that would have a slightly higher damage and range than the longbow, and a ton of people, like hundreds of people, wrote in asking for a finesse variant long sword that has a slightly higher damage, specifically saying that's what a katana should be, even though I kinda agree with the 5e designers that the longsword is already a katana. But what do you think? And hey, if you want more frequent updates on this weapon system project, join our Discord by becoming a member here on YouTube or a patron, so you can see my occasional screenshots of things I've added to my notes for this supplement. I try to do it weekly, but I'm getting married in a couple months, things are busy. Alternatively, if you want to view my entire weapon system notes draft at your leisure, you can join the Pillar tier on Patreon, which also comes with a ton of other content. Patrons really do make all this possible, so thank you, Patreon supporters, and thank you for your likes and comments and sharing these videos, because the more people that see these videos and talk about this project, the better we can make it. Keep building. And a tray. I think that was good.